Prime Minister Mark Carney spoke directly to New York business leaders today, making the case for Canada, pitching a new partnership with the United States, one that's led by a stronger, more ambitious Canada.
Because a stronger Canada is a better ally. And we know that while Canada and the United States have had our differences over the centuries, we have always worked and eventually worked through them because we share values and our common interests run deep.
Now, those remarks come just as the U.S. and Mexico formally launched trade talks, with 3 rounds scheduled between now and July. Meanwhile, Carney's top U.S. trade minister is talking to the U.S. administration about a trip to Washington to meet with his counterpart, Jamieson Greer. But there's still no confirmed date for talks with Canada to formally begin. The Canada-U.S. Trade Minister, Dominic LeBlanc, joins me now. Minister, good to see you again.
Good evening, David.
So the Prime Minister in his speech today made a pitch that Canada can help make America great again, to borrow a phrase that he used, laid out in detail proposals on aluminum, autos, and critical minerals. Are those proposals tied to CUSMA? Are those tied to the sectoral proposals, or are they the sectoral tariffs, or tied to the whole ball of wax?
Probably some version of the latter, David. Mm-hmm. These are things that we have talked to our American counterparts about for many months, probably going back to the Prime Minister's visit to Washington in October. He has made a number of specific proposals to President Trump that we think are in the interest of the Canadian, obviously, economy, but that would be beneficial to the American economy as well. You covered the sectors where we think we can be a valuable partner for the United States. Energy is an obvious one. Aluminum, again, is another example where we are the supplier of choice for the United States at a critical time. So all of this speaks to having a trade relationship, a new trading relationship with the United States that is in Canada's economic interest and the United States' economic interest, of course. But that's made a lot easier if we're not applying Section 232 sectoral tariffs to parts of the Canadian economy that are critical, obviously, to integrated North American economic prosperity. Therein lies the contradiction.
Right. So are these the focus of the conversations you're having now? Is it those 3 areas, or is it still on the 232s? Because you talk about constructive and productive conversations, but everything seems to be unofficial. There are no scheduled formal negotiations that I'm aware of at this point in time. I mean, how have things fundamentally changed in, I don't know, last month, last 2 months, or when you were last here on the show?
Probably in the last, well, surely I've been on the show in the last 2 months, David.
Yeah, you were here one day.
Okay, yeah. I'm always happy to be here. I look forward to this. Yeah. It's the best part of my week. As you know, the United States interrupted the negotiations last fall. They resumed a couple of months ago in the sense that we were having specific meetings with the United States Trade Representative around the review of CUSMA, getting ready for the prescribed review date of July 1st. So those ongoing conversations, I speak to Ambassador Greer, the U.S. Trade Representative. Madame Charette speaks to her counterpart, who's a deputy U.S. Trade Representative, a guy called Jeff Getman. In fact, Janice and I had an hour-long meeting on Memorial Day, Holiday Monday, with Ambassador Greer and Ambassador Getman, and Janice and I.
This is Monday past.
This is 3 days ago, yeah. He very kindly gave it literally an hour of his time to go through a number of issues. So it's a continuation. Prime Minister exchanges messages and speaks to the President on a whole bunch of issues on a regular basis. But there has been an increase in the sort of meetings between Ambassador Wiseman, American representatives, but Janice Charette and her counterparts and the trade representatives over the last 2 months.
Okay, so the more frequent points of contact, I guess, is what you're saying.
More than points of contact. Text message, hey, how you doing, David? It's a point of contact. Sure. It's not that. It's what are the issues that the United States is concerned about? What does Canada want to achieve? What does June 1st look like? There's a date in the treaty on June 1st where the 3 parties can identify formally
June 1st or July 1st?
Well, July 1st is the review.
Okay, and there's
so
another
that
one.
would be the meeting of the commission. It presumably would be myself and Ambassador Greer and Secretary Ebrard from Mexico. We also work on a very active basis with our Mexican counterparts. I've had a number of meetings with them in preparation of this review. But beside the review, the CUSMA review process, as you properly noted, David, are sectoral tariffs that the United States are applying to trading partners around the world that we think are obviously not in Canada's economic interest, but not in the interest of the United States as well. And that's why we've been discussing with them a number of things that we can do together that might point to a direction where those sectoral tariffs don't remain as difficult as they are.
Well, what would be the timeline for that? Like, you really think you're making?
I knew.
Okay,
Oh,
but look, I know, and look, with that administration, they do say, "Oh, we're close on this, but then
or things change. This week, we think that we're zeroing in on a potential agreement, and then circumstances change. I'm optimistic that we have a path forward over the next number of weeks leading up to July 1st that's active and constructive, but the actual outcomes from the United States administration are something that they'll have to speak to.
So over the next number of weeks, that's active and constructive on the sectoral tariffs. Am I understanding you correctly?
On the CUSMA review.
On the CUSMA review.
On the CUSMA review process. But again, I mean, if the United States, and this is part of the public conversation, they publish every year the National Trades Estimates book.
Right.
It's a big book of how every country around the world is doing things that their trade representative office doesn't like, non-tariff barriers, that kind of thing. They talk to us about that. This is in the public domain. We talk about those issues in some detail with them. But we also have a list of things that Canada wants. That are in the economic interest of Canadians. But there's so much common interest there, David, that we remain optimistic that we can find a circumstance where we recommit to the trilateral trading agreement and deal with any bilateral issues that the United States and Canada want to deal with.
But nothing is imminent, right, on sectoral or on CUSMA? Am I understanding that? Like, you're talking and you're making progress, but nothing seems imminent. And do we even have a date when formal negotiation will start?
So we're working on those exact questions, and you say imminent, and I get why you have to ask that question, and business people and workers ask us that all the time. Trying to determine what's imminent in Mr. Trump's administration and what tomorrow and next week looks like isn't perhaps the most helpful thing, because recent history will show us that in some cases it's hard to get precise timelines. But as the Prime Minister said today in New York, David, the whole world wants to do business with Canada. There are countries around the world that are looking at what Canada can offer in terms of trading potential, in terms of critical minerals, energy. We saw a good news announcement this week. But those same attributes are absolutely true for the United States as well. I mean, we share this neighborhood. We have this historic trading relationship. So if, as the Prime Minister noted, the whole world is looking to strengthen their economic relationship with Canada, the Prime Minister is very active in that space, it's in the American economic interest also to figure out the best way to put the Canada-U.S. Mexico trading relationship on a less unpredictable footing.
Right. Look, but there have been public expressions of frustration. Jameson Greer, was lamenting that only Canada and China have retaliated against us in this tariff world. Everyone else has accepted it. You happen to be their two biggest trading and customer countries, and probably have more leverage than the others who would just accept it, and maybe that's why. But we saw the ambassador out again talking about the alcohol bans on provincial shelves. This is a persistent source of frustration for Ambassador Hoekstra. He said that even if it's lifted, though, nothing comes back to Canada as a trade-off for that if Doug Ford starts stocking his shelves again. Are you anticipating retaliation over the alcohol ban from the United States? Because Ambassador Greer has mused about trade action on this, and there's been some suggestion floated that maybe retaliatory tariffs on Canadian alcohol imports into the U.S. could be a consequence.
So that issue has not been raised in my conversations. I've seen the ambassador's comments, But again, let's remind ourselves, David, the provincial governments made those decisions in response to the American tariffs, which didn't respect the free trade agreement.
You don't have to convince me.
No, but
it's
so
clear
a retaliation on a retaliatory measure, you can see the race to the basement. That's not particularly constructive. These are decisions that provinces made as a very public way to show a level of dissatisfaction with decisions that the American administration made. I don't know if the Americans will decide to take some step in retaliation to decisions that provinces and territories made in their sovereign jurisdiction. I had a meeting of provincial and territorial trade ministers this week. After actually the meeting with Ambassador Greer on Monday. It was a really good hour-and-a-half conversation. I updated the provincial trade ministers and territorial ministers on our work to prepare for the CUSMA review. We obviously talked about the 232 sectoral tariffs. The Prime Minister, I expect, in the coming next couple of weeks, will have a meeting with premiers on these issues as well, and other issues. So we're very much buckled up with provinces and territories. Everybody's trying to pull in the same direction, and we'll just keep doing the work that's necessary until we get to the place that's in Canada's economic interest.
I know the alcohol ban is a decision premiers made, provinces made, but the Americans don't really seem to care about that distinction. The CRTC has recently made a decision to triple the amount of money they want the streaming companies, mostly American, to contribute to Canadian content, and this has also upset key players in the United States. Is the government going to implement that decision, abide by that decision by the CRTC, given that it seems to have angered key elements of the biggest country you're negotiating with?
So again, we've taken note of the public comments. This issue is not new. The Online Streaming Act and the role of the independent regulator, it's a quasi-judicial tribunal, the CRTC, they came to an independent quasi-judicial decision based on legislation that Parliament had adopted. We think, and we say this to the Americans all the time, that defending Canadian cultural sovereignty and cultural institutions, including, I'm a minority Francophone from New Brunswick. Imagine the importance of Acadian cultural institutions and the ability to tell Acadian stories. That's true right across Canada, but it's even in a small minority province like New Brunswick. It's important that the Government of Canada and Parliament defend Canadian culture and Canadian creators and create a circumstance that these stories can be celebrated in Canada, but around the world. So we think we can do that in an effective way, and we've taken note of the American concern in this issue. It's not new. It's other trading partners have also come to decisions in their own sovereign way around these issues.
Right, but does that mean the CRTC decision will stand? Because I know Minister Miller said the government would review it, look at it.
Sure.
And the Americans have since started pushing back on it.
So again, as much as I'm really happy to come on this show, the government letting a decision stand of an independent regulator is not something in the week the decision comes out that ministers, and it's not properly in my portfolio.
Well, it is a Canada-U.S. trade issue. This is why I asked you.
At its heart, it's about the cultural sovereignty of the country.
I understand.
And it was not passed in a way to enable or irritate trade partners. This legislation was adopted by Parliament, and the CRTC, in its independent discretion, made a decision about protecting Canadian cultural industries and Canada's cultural sovereignty. So that's as important today as it was a week ago. But there's so much, David, that we can do, and the Prime Minister outlined that today, that is collaborative and constructive in building a North American economy, a new trading relationship with the United States. We're focusing on those issues, and the Prime Minister, I thought, laid them out to an American audience today in New York in a way that we hope will advance the conversation.
Just as a final point, Minister, he talked about almost like a Fortress North America on auto. right, as the fully integrated auto sector, which is obviously one of the core industries at play here. One of the suggestions we're hearing out of the talks in Mexico, I know it's an old idea, but maybe there's some more specifics on this, of a common tariff agreement between the NAFTA partners, the CUSMA partners, on cars manufactured outside of North America. There's something happening in the Mexico talks. Is that what is on the table here? Do you think that's where it could end up? Because I know you've reached out to Korean makers, European makers, Japanese car makers to offset some of the hit maybe from these. So how would you calibrate these potential challenges of a common tariff regime?
So again, you're asking me to comment on some speculation coming out of a meeting in Mexico City where I wasn't. So I'm in Ottawa, where I'm not remote from Mexico City.
You do talk to Mr. Ebrard.
I do talk to Ebrard. Right. He came to Canada with an important Mexican business delegation, Montreal, Toronto. We had a great 3 days together. We have said to the United States that if their concern, take for example in the steel industry, take for example aluminum, the Americans have talked a lot about the influence of non-market economies, dumping products in North America, transshipping. Those are the kind of constructive conversations that we're always anxious to have with the Mexicans and, of course, with the Americans. But the auto industry, David, you're right, is an example of how over decades the supply chains became more and more integrated. It's true in Mexico, in Canada, and in the United States. That's why the tariffs on automobiles, you're unscrambling an omelet. Like you can't unscramble, you're from Newfoundland, you can't unscramble an omelet in Newfoundland, you can't in Washington either. So our view.
I didn't know the omelet thing was specific geographically. No, I take your point. Like it is a mess.
I'm trying to find an expression.
Yeah, no, I got
the best expressions in the country.
I got you. Okay, but so all right. So it's just no clarity on that. You have not heard that. You don't know if that's where that is going.
I don't think I said I haven't heard that. I said that I don't think it would be helpful for us to speculate. Right. And I know Ambassador Getman, with whom I was in the video meeting on Monday, is or was leaving for for Mexico. Right. The deputy trade representative, I think he may still be there. I don't know the nature of those conversations, and I haven't spoken to the Mexican economy secretary in the last number of days.
Okay. Dominic LeBlanc, Minister for Canada-U.S. Trade. We appreciate the time, sir. Thanks,
David. Have a great weekend.
Well, the power panel is here to talk about all of that. Andrew Thompson is a former NDP cabinet minister in Saskatchewan. Jamie Ellerton is a former Conservative staffer. Shachi Kurl is the president of the Angus Reid Institute. And here with me in Ottawa, Michelle Cadario. She was the deputy chief of staff to former Prime Minister Paul Martin. It is good to see you all. Happy Thursday. Michelle, just the Prime Minister's speech, Canada Strong, can make America great again. We're mashing together some slogans here and cross-border cooperation. What did you make of his message today?
Well, I think that it was clearly a signal that even though the Prime Minister is very set on finding other markets and diversifying our trade and really working closer cooperation, with Europe, that we haven't forgotten about the United States, that they remain they remain our biggest trading partner, and they likely always will be. Like it's very hard to ever try and get away from that, and so it's about talking about reality, but it's also just a signal that you can do two things at the same time in terms of pursuing other markets, but still understanding and appreciating that there's a lot of Canadian jobs, a lot of Canadian businesses that are dependent on having some kind of a freer trade relationship with the United States, and he hasn't taken his eye off the ball on that. And so I think that there's no definitive timelines, but I think that he wanted to make sure that people understood that he can do more than one thing at a time.
Andrew, I don't know if it caught the president's attention, but Ambassador Pete Hoekstra posted on social media, Prime Minister Carney says something worth repeating today, a Canada Strong will help make America great again. I think a lot of Americans can get behind that kind of positive message. That's a rare thing in this moment from this particular ambassador. What do you make of what we've seen so far today?
Well, if that was the Prime Minister's intended audience, then he obviously hit the mark in terms of his messaging. But, while the substance of the speech, I think, is fine, there's some real curiosities as to how us diversifying and moving away from trading with the U.S. makes the U.S. stronger. There's a leap in logic there that I guess needs more explanation for many of us to understand. But the decision that I do think will be talked about for some time is his decision to buy into the American framing about MAGA, which is problematic both in terms of how it resonates within, I think, particular American markets, but also very much in terms of what it means for the domestic audience. Are we now saying that the agenda that the Liberals are pursuing is in fact copacetic with, if not in sync with MAGA politics? Because I think that really is problematic. That goes against everything that we were told in the last election in terms of what Canada Strong was. So some of this may just be clever framing as an attempt to position this in a frame that looks for approval from Trump. But it's not without problems. And so I don't entirely understand whether this was an off-the-cuff comment, whether this was something that was planned. But the leap that it requires people to make in terms of what the Prime Minister is saying, I think is politically problematic.
Well, Jamie, it wasn't off the cuff. It was in the script of the speech. So this is clearly an intentional thing in terms of the message. I mean, do you see it more as clever framing or as something else? How do you view the overall message to the U.S. today from the Prime Minister?
Yeah, I kind of agree with Andrew on this one. I actually think it's kind of incoherent. I think when you look at the substance of the rest of the speech, going down to New York, the global financial capital, talking about Canada being open for business and looking to attract investment and highlighting key sectors where the Prime Minister thinks there's opportunity to bring that foreign direct investment to Canada is obviously a smart thing for a Prime Minister to be doing. But for him to invoke MAGA is frankly incoherent. And I think it is kind of baffling. I think when you look at what's going on, I think no one really has a read as to where these trade negotiations are going, because I don't think the Americans know where these trade negotiations are going or what they want. All they want is instability. They don't know what even they're trying to bargain for other than to keep everyone guessing. But I think when you look at how loaded of a term MAGA is, if a conservative politician said this, you wouldn't be able to open up Twitter, Instagram, any news outlet and have this being lambasted, framed negatively, and being effectively denounced as anti-Canadian. The Prime Minister essentially 180s on what he had to say at Davos and so much of what he campaigned on in the last election. And there's like a few murmurs, but like he's not really getting, I think, called out for the incoherence in his messaging on
You think it's a full 180 from Davos and the election?
Come on.
Like, really? Like, that essentially we're a steady, reliable partner. Here's things we can work on.
As we knew it was over. We have to negotiate and trade elsewhere because we cannot rely on the Americans. To then say, actually, we're going to try and get a deal and like, let's help you make America great again. David, that is 100% loaded. And even if it's just rhetoric, it is such a diversion from where he's been on this.
Okay, Michelle, I'll come to you first, but Shachi's nodding along there, so I'm going to go to her, and then I'll come back to you.
What the Prime Minister...
No, I got to go to Shachi first, and then I'll come back to you. Sorry,
Sorry.
she hasn't spoken yet. Oh, yeah. Go ahead, Shachi.
That's it, Michelle. You can't host anymore. You're done. This is a reference to last week. Okay, so I'm actually a little bit surprised that Ambassador Hoekstra didn't take umbrage at the fact that Mark Carney was suggesting that America wasn't already great, because, you know, problem solved. The election happened and it's great now. Everything's fine. So I do take the point that Jamie and Andrew have pointed out around the rhetorical flourish side of it. I would additionally point out, however, that Prime Minister Carney knows he has some political capital to spend here. The words, I think, are going to, depending on how you view this, whether as a cute rhetorical flourish, especially in a room where you're not speaking to the people in New York necessarily in that room, but through to them, to the White House. So that will land awkwardly for some and land fine for others. The bigger issue is deeds. The bigger issue is what Minister LeBlanc does or says or is able to do, or frankly concedes if there are concessions to be made in the coming days and weeks. I think that's the bigger issue. If we see Canada follow up that kind of speechifying with the conversation on dropping alcohol restrictions, that's going to be not so good. That is going to be a situation wherein you have a true change, a 180 change in terms of what and how much Canadians are prepared to to accept. And so what I mean by that is when you have a situation where back in the Mulroney years, the whole idea that, Ronald Reagan saying, Brian understands, he gets it. He's here as an advocate for Canada-U.S. relations from the U.S. side. That is something that that did not stand the Prime Minister of the day well during that time. And so Carney can say these things. Let's see how they land. Let's see what the fallout is. But it's more about what does he do from here in terms of trying to patch that relationship up.
All right, Michelle, your thoughts on it all?
Sure. He's clearly saying having a strong Canada does not in any way diminish, Mr. President, what you want to do with America. It's not about endorsing the MAGA agenda, and that is such a stretch, and I applaud you for trying to make that leap of logic. But it's in no way there. If you actually read the speech, the thesis that he put forward in Davos is eminently clear. It is the logic continues to be logic, and he is very straightforward in terms of what he's doing. He was very straightforward in terms of the announcements that he made when he was at CanSec this week as well, in terms of where he's going with the Canadian defense sector and how that he sees that in terms of the industrial base. Again, it was completely consistent with that build agenda that he's been talking about. So, if you want to try and tear apart some different lines and, perhaps people won't see it as, may see it or want to see it as how you've suggested. But clearly his intent has nothing to do with endorsing of any kind of a MAGA agenda.
But just coming back to, and I get Andrew and Jamie in on this, the notion that it's a 180 or a shift from the election, I mean, he does say in the speech, our core objective across these partnerships is increased strategic autonomy, live in a world where integration has been weaponized, nostalgia is not a strategy, we are focused on what we can control, building at home and weaving a dense web of international partnerships abroad. I mean, that's still the same general thrust, right, Andrew? He's saying that if we are stronger as a country, Canada, we are a better partner to the United States. Is it just the use of the phrase, make America, because that is the phrase that's going to get all the headlines, right? But underneath all that is still, broadly seems like the same direction.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, as I say, the substance of the speech, I think, is generally fine in terms of what he's outlining, in terms of the approach the government's taking. And, has been pointed out, there are a number of actions the government has taken to actually, bolster Canada's independent position within the, both its procurement stance within defense and in its foreign relations. I think the question, though, is one of how he is now trying to spin this back to work within the Republican frame, as opposed to simply saying, which was something I think we had all agreed on many months ago, was the stronger point was simply saying Canada has a lot to offer. Obviously, we're a consistent partner, we're a steady partner, we're a reliable partner. The piece that's undoing all of this is the uncertainty, and what we need to figure out is how to move back to an environment of greater certainty, putting the emphasis again back on the trade deal. I really don't know. I mean, this just may be Carney's political style. We saw the same thing with the weird reference a few months back to the Plains of Abraham. I mean, he kind of steps out thinking that maybe this is, I don't know, something that is going to be, catchy, not realizing, in fact, that a lot of this language is, in fact, hugely politically fraught. And I think the MAGA reference is politically fraught.
Okay, Jamie, I'm going to get you, but first I want to show, speaking of politically catchy, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. He criticized the Prime Minister's speech, saying it's not clear, based on this speech, where Carney stands on the U.S. relationship. Take a listen to that.
The Liberal Prime Minister was off to New York to expand his favorite export, speeches. And once again, it was filled with more of his seemingly sophisticated but highly contradictory buzzwords. On the one hand, he says that we are in the middle of a rupture with the United States, while on the other, he says he wants to make America, in his words, great again. His elbows were again flapping up and down in the rhetorical chicken dance, as he cannot seem to decide if integration with the U.S. is a strength or a weakness.
All right, so Jamie, is that sort of along your line of analysis on the speech? What do you make of that?
Yeah, like I admire Michelle's attempt to spin this, but like in 2026, to invoke MEGA, Make America Great Again, and when you look at how it's quoted from the prepared text, it is capitalized. He is genuinely invoking and literally quoting the Prime Minister's whole political framework, the President's whole political framework. I just don't know how he goes down there after the past 18 months, talking about the rupture, talking about how we need to build a new world, look for partners elsewhere, and then goes down to New York and says, actually, Donald, let's work together to make America great again. Like, it's politically incoherent, David.
Okay, Shachi, do you think Canadians see it that way? Because I've always understood the goal to be to diversify where you can, to build internal resilience while salvaging everything you can with the United States. Integration is still possible. It's just not going to be automatic like it has been for the last half century. Maybe that's wrong. Maybe that's too nuanced. I don't know. How do you think the public's going to see it?
I mean, the one thing that Canadians have been remarkably consistent on over the course of the last more than a year has been stick those elbows right into the noses of the Trump administration. So it's not just up, it's up and out. So when we ask Canadians, do you want to take a more conciliatory line or a really hard line on the relationship, on what is conceded, on the give, on the cooperation, Canadians come back every single time, even when we ask them questions such as like, well, what if it smoothed things out? What if it put this trade war to an end? Canadians continue, a majority, 3/4 say, you know what, hell no, let's continue to take a very hard stance on this. So there is political risk. There is also potential political opportunity or reward if there is a goal or some sort of get that the Canadian government can bring back from Washington this next round of talks. Look what we got out of this, and all we had to do was say some words and try to be a little bit nicer. I think that flavors and colors this speech a little bit more differently than I think has already been pointed out. The way Mark Carney chooses to use language sometimes, and to what end, and did it make a difference?
Yeah, look, I don't know, Michelle, if we can view these trade negotiations like any other normal negotiations, just given the nature of the other side of it. Like, look at what's happening with Iran as an example of how do you know where things truly stand, right? But last word on this, and I want to switch to the Alberta topic. Just you.
Yeah, no, the Minister LeBlanc, your early set was pretty clear that they're doing the best they can. They're doing their work. They've got proposals that they're kind of talking about. Not necessarily a formal process, but he was also, pretty realistic in sharing that who can bet on anything in terms of timelines or that. Going back to the Prime Minister's speech, I think that he was delivering a very specific message, probably to one person, that just because I'm building Canada strong and that's our agenda, it's not a threat to you, the U.S. It can be complementary. That's all.
Well, I thought Dominic LeBlanc was very clear that maybe things aren't that clear because that's what I took away from that entire conversation.